Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Soulganize Your Life podcast. And I can say that the more that I Soulganize my life, the more I'm really enjoying being a human on this planet. And, the outer circumstances of life are always stimulating us in, to me, two very distinct ways. One is through the separate psychological ego, and the other is through a divine soul connection to all that is. And why do I think it's important to know the difference as a therapist? Well, I'm all about lessening people's suffering, and I love to have people on the podcast that can help us talk about that. And our guest today is going to be invaluable, I know, because she's going to help us relate conflict that we have often within ourselves. And it's going to give us some ideas on how to integrate these two perspectives into one full, messy human experience. So I'd like to introduce Serena. I did say that right? Who has
yes, you did indeed. Thank you.
Who has a basketball picture in the background. So I have a feeling that we're going to talk about athletics today. So jump on in and tell us all about you.
Certainly. Well, thank you, first of all, Lynn, for having me. This is such a delight and an honor to be part of your Soulganize podcast. And I'm just thrilled to be able to provide whatever information for other souls who are curious to make some changes and adjustments and transitions in their lives. A little bit about where I am right now. Yes, you called it. I am currently at my line of work. I serve as manager of athletics at a sporting club in Philadelphia. And my main focus at this organization is I'm also a squash and pickleball instructor. So that is one area I tend to hone in on a pretty in-depthly with. At the same time, when it comes to my coaching background, I often am very passionate about integrating my spiritual beliefs and also that obviously connecting with my soul on the squash court specifically. I'm fresh to pickleball, so tapping into that energy field as well. I've noticed that certainly there is a difference between the squash community and the pickleball community, and it's really fun to be able to navigate and work with as many personalities as I have, and be able to help ground them and help them find their just passion in the sport that they're playing. So that goes for anybody who is an athlete, and so there we have it.
Nice. And what I love about this podcast is meeting someone like you where they work and people maybe being shocked, right? Like, wait, my athletic director might just be a spiritual guru that I could talk to that I don't even know. And I just walk by them and like check in every day. I think there's so much hidden spirituality, right? That is, we don't wear armbands, we don't walk around,
right.
Looking like with a sign over our head. So, I also just love us everyday people to be able to share, like I can have these conversations with you, even on the squash court. And when you said that, you said the squash and the pickleball community are different. I almost went to like, do sports have their own sense of consciousness? You know how a human does, right? But do you think sports have like their own consciousness?
100%. Yes,
do you?
I do indeed. I do. It's really fascinating. I feel like I always start with that subconscious. I actually call it the sub-C. And in our arena of sports, whatever sport you're participating in, obviously we know that sport is unique to itself, right? Whether you are a basketball player or a squasher or a footballer or anybody who is participating in the sport, you are diving deep into an area of focus where you really want to make sure that you're grounded, and obviously it's your body at the same time. That's your temple where you're connecting the mind, body, and soul together. And as a swimmer, you're going to be doing something very different with your body than you are if you're playing volleyball. So I do believe 100% that is apparent when it comes to sports, indeed, and athleticism.
Yeah, I never thought about that before. I remember Michael Jordan said famously something along the effects of, I'm not playing basketball is playing me. And I think that's why he was so great at what he did, is he let the consciousness of basketball come through him, right? Versus say, I'm dribbling the ball and I'm making this game happen, and maybe to what you're saying is that is one way for an athlete to look at their chosen sport versus from maybe an egoic perspective of like, I'm the squash player, I'm doing this, or I'm the pickleball champion. right? So this is what I think would be fun to talk about for a little bit. It's just your version, maybe your own life's version of being an athlete, where maybe you were more in touch with the ego versus learning more about the spirituality later. Like, walk us through a little bit about your athletic career.
Certainly. Well, I grew up in a family, especially of siblings, where we were all athletes. I was a swimmer growing up, and then I started playing squash when I was 9. So I've been playing, I'm 49, so I've been playing for 40 years.
Wow.
And, yeah, it's kind of wild, right? And I never really thought that I was never the ultimate competitor in my family. Of the 3 siblings, I have an older sister and older brother. I knew early on that I had a spiritual side. I always felt different. I always felt like I had an intuition that didn't seem as familiar. So I had to learn how to kind of navigate, even at an early young age, of, as I progressed in sports. At the same time, my subconscious was also experiencing another level, and it took me some time to kind of build that together. And during the course of my high school year, when I was competing pretty heavily in squash, I just remember thinking, kind of like what you said about Michael Jordan, it isn't for me so much about the winning, right? It's more for me about just being able to play my best. And I have had some wonderful levels in my career where I've been very successful and others not so much. Yet at the same time, my biggest takeaway and learning experience is not to be hard on myself. And I do find that the ego really, right, when the ego is there, the commander in chief, as Carl Jung would say, the ego can really be conflicting when it comes to your performance. And I would have always said, and I was a field hockey and lacrosse player as well, and I was never excellent at those sports. I was never superb, and that was okay. I still excelled at the level I wanted to excel. I still enjoyed the sport. And for me, also, it was making the connection, even if I was playing squash on a team or being an individual team player and or playing on another team, making the connection with my teammates. And that was always another way for me to understand how to navigate spiritually, where I could actually find a balance and not feel badly if, for example, when I was a keeper in field hockey, I let the ball past me, right, or 2. So yes, I would say for me, the ego has always kind of been a little bit more subdued. A side note, because we are on the topic of spirituality and the soul, I am very passionate about astrology, and so and the side of divination, and that's something I started basically studying when I was 16. So I've really, and I've gotten deeper and deeper into understanding those practices and how they have, where my personality lies per se versus someone else. And so, I'm a Gemini, I'm Virgo rising, I have a Taurus moon. Yet, for example, my sister is a Capricorn, and we know Capricorns are the goats and they want to strive. So she was sort of always the ultimate tough competitor. And so that has also been just another area that I have, I guess, been able to honor my own ego in terms of being able to be an athlete. Yeah, the ego can be very interfering too, if you will. Right?
Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying that you grew up more balanced or spiritually aware than maybe the average American, but watched other egos maybe in, as they're competing with you, or, when you just think about yourself though, as a kid, did your ego show up in other areas of your life if it wasn't in sports? Like, what do you remember about sort of feeling separate and not enough? And, was there any other area of your life you felt like that?
I feel that it wasn't so much the ego. Yes, I guess to a degree. I just remember I had a basically what I would call my own personal wake-up call. I had gone through a pretty big shift after I graduated from high school, where I did a bridge year before college, and I knew I was going to be going to play D1 at a university, and I decided to spend some time abroad, especially in India. And I had at age 18 a pretty significant experience that certainly made me realize And it wasn't 110% pleasant either. And it really made me realize how important it was for me to kind of take a step back and look into my soul a bit more. I fell into a pretty heavy depression for a few years. And that was also challenging to come back and play at a D1 for a D1 school and competitively play as a squasher and know that I was kind of still suffering with how to handle that shift within my own personality and where was that control and how was I able to handle it and take care of myself. So I haven't really talked about this in my life, so other than with folks who I'm closest with, but it was certainly a wake up call, and it made me realize more about how blessed we are, and just to continue to be grateful and to be appreciative of what we have, and just knowing that, you know, unfortunately, we are surrounded by the ego all the time. It exists even within everyone. Yet sometimes I feel as those souls, when they get to that point where they want to be so controlling, it impacts who they are, and it impacts their, honestly, it impacts their contentedness, their happiness, their peace of mind, their work-life balance. It's really interesting to see where the ego can be so conflicting with even pleasantries.
Yeah. So when you were a D1 athlete, right, that's probably the most, I would assume, intense experience of, you're saying I had these two very different, like I quote unquote sort of made it as an athlete, a D1 athlete, but I fell into a depression. How did you manage the, you know, because that's a big thing that I like to talk about on the podcast, is how did you integrate this deep sort of disconnect of feeling separate, alone, and depressed with a soul that is joyful about playing, right? And is seeing it as a wonderful opportunity. So it's interesting. You're almost having the opposite effect, I would imagine. You know, it's like you don't have any pressure from the ego to be this great athlete. You're enjoying it and you're doing it at a high level, but then you have this other depression happening. Like, how did you navigate that?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, it was hard. It certainly was hard. I was blessed to have souls in my life who I could confide in. I had a really wonderful coach who actually is retired this past year and had a very successful career. And she seemed to understand where I was coming from. And I also do believe that, you know, certain souls come into your energy field when they're meant to. They're meant to be there for a purpose. You're meant to learn from them and grow from them and their experiences. So I definitely had mates and besties, if you will, who looked after me and made sure that I was coming out of my own and taking care of myself. Squash also for me, though, was a way for me to kind of not suppress the depression. It was just a way for me to, because I was so connected to the sport and I've been playing for so long and I'm so passionate about it, it was really a way for me to, it uplifted me. And I was able to really enjoy it and have fun and not really think about so much what was causing the discomfort in my soul at the time. And, you know, aside from my experience in India, I did have other personal, I guess, issues, if you will, that were pretty detrimental and causing conflict at the same time. So, yeah, my coach definitely, and confidants and besties and just soul sisters, that as I would call them, soul brothers, who, whether they were athletes or not, who were really there to support me. And they could tell, like you can just tell when someone's going through that transition.
Yeah. So what's really cool is to hear is even in a D1 situation, you had people supporting you from the soul level and wanting you as a human being to be okay, rather than I need my competitor, my teammate, or my, you know, my team member to step up. It sounded very much like that wasn't like the ego wasn't as loud in your teammates and your coach, right? And that helped you continue to expand your experience of athletics and to keep letting it be in touch with your spiritual side and keep that parallel thing kind of going, rather than thinking like, I'm never playing squash again. These people don't care. Like they just want me to win. Like that's so cool because, you know, a lot of times people like me, maybe are people who aren't as athletic, right, or didn't have that experience, don't understand how it can be a spiritual journey for an athlete, or how an egoic athlete may not understand that it could be spiritual for them. and that
Exactly.
spirit,
Exactly.
that level of joy and happiness and flow is available, right? It doesn't have to be all force and push and achieve and compete, right? And so I'm just wondering if you could speak more to, what for an athlete that may be listening to this or a coach, how did that happen? Like how did your team do that for you, or your coach, make you continue to love the sport itself, like the consciousness of the sport, right?
It is interesting because circling back to what you were saying a little bit ago, I was recently having a conversation with some other squashers in our community, women squashers, about how oftentimes, yes, we go through such a highly competitive period in our lives, and so we get burnout and we hang up our racket. I totally did that, and I hung up my racket not out of being burned out. I hung it up because I knew I was supposed to go on another sacred journey. I dove deep into the healing arts, and I became trained as a massage therapist, and I worked in, I lived in Hawaii. I lived in sacred areas of the world and lovely places that really enabled me to dive deeper into who my soul and essence was. And honestly, I never thought I would revisit squash. And as one of my studies said, it has a way of creeping back up on you. And, I've been coaching now for 12 years, yet circling back to what you were saying about, that the teammates, and I feel as though, and I'm reflecting on it now, and then where we are in the presence of what I call this universal shift happening. And I do believe that, we as souls, if you look at those who are my age now, and we were all bonding in our early 20s, a lot of us are all speaking the same language. So I do feel as though those who I was involved with, especially on the squash team, were already kind of, maybe they weren't coming into their, subconsciousness as much, their mind, body, and soul connection as yet I really feel as though there was certainly that element already really present in the community where I was. And my coach, even though being older, she just had this sort of aura about her that for me was really comforting. And she also kind of thought I was just, I did my own thing too. So I was very unique in my own way, and she allowed for that. I don't want, maybe not the word allowed. She appreciated my uniqueness, and she basically said, "Okay, Serena, you do you," and that also gave me a lot of gratification. Yes, do I feel like I probably could have performed better at times for my team? Of course. Yet I know I performed the way I was meant to and how I was meant to. So I think a lot of it really has to do with, who comes into your life and who's also willing to open up, and to whom you're willing to open up, right? It's that combination of the two. We just had an interesting spiritual, profound connection. And I did a bridge year during college, my junior year. I went back to India, actually, and that's where I had pretty much full closure, which was wonderful. Yet having that kind of spiritual energy already around me was very helpful. Even as I said, it wasn't as to the capacity where I was.
Yeah. And so, I truly believe that the universe, like you said, is going through a shift. And it also wants us to keep playing sports. Like it doesn't want us just to sit all around like in a circle and say, right. And like,
Right.
wants us to work. Sure. Wants us to work. It wants us to like have parties. It wants us to keep like playing sports. Like, spirituality used to seem so serious, right? Like you had to go to church and like do all like, or, you had to sit in an ashram or whatever. And I'm like, no, spirituality should be our everyday occurrence. And so like, how have you managed to just bring all that into like just daily life, like at squash or, how does that play out for you?
Sure. I've always kind of looked at whatever activity I'm doing as a form of meditation. So like you said, we're all thinking, to me, like even cleaning the dishes is a form of meditation, right?
Yes.
And I have one philosophy as well. And one I say to my squashers is, if you're having a hard day or just a tough week or what have you, go put it out on the squash ball. So use that time to reground, recenter, and put that energy out on the ball. Yes, let that ego take over if you need to, but it's bringing you that sense of freedom and liberation, and also from my perspective, it's also about the healing. And so every day for me, honestly, I get so much energy from other souls and I love it. I obviously need downtime too. Yet when it comes to coaching and working with athletes, they bring so much. I learned so much from them, and not so much, they learn from me as well, but they're just, I look at everyone and how they navigate and how each individual plays differently and their body language and their composure and their personality on the court and their timidness or their competitive spirit or, in the squash world, you're watching right there behind a glass court. Are they nervous, right? And I often say that the beauty of anxiety, and not anxiety per se, yet nervousness when you're competing, is it shows that you're real, right? It shows that we're human. And from an authenticity of a spiritual space, I'm also a huge believer in rituals. So as an athlete and as a coach, when I'm working with my athletes, if you will, I want them to find a space on the court, whether it's pickleball or squash, that they can practice the ritual. For example, going to the service box. Is there a method, like tapping the ball, whatever they do? Like I tap my shoe. I have all these rituals to ground me before I start that point. And I am just a believer in remembering that when you are an athlete, it's really important to focus on, yes, we're all going to make mistakes, right? We're all human. As I said, it's noting that, you're doing something that you love and you're really passionate about it. And that's extremely, to me, beautiful. And when you start to, as you were talking, to circle back again to Michael Jordan, really being able to hone in on the love and the passion you have for the sport, that puts the ego in such a different light, if you will. I know we were talking about articles, and I'd written an article about sports several months ago, maybe about a year ago, for a magazine, and it honed in on love and sports in general, and why that really helps, as I said, kind of control that ego. Yeah, it gets you excited, it gets your adrenaline pumping, and you're really, your performance is going to change. So I oftentimes feel like the ego can really, excuse my French, it can screw up your performance, right? It can make it really shitty for you. And it can really ruin energy elsewhere. So being mindful of how you present yourself, especially when you're playing a sport, and being part of a team, says a lot about who you are as a soul and your persona.
Yeah, that how you do anything is how you do everything, right? But also, one of the things I like to point out is the difference between the ego and the soul when you're talking. And, you said, I learned so much from my students. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Course in Miracles, but it basically says you will be the teacher and the student all the time, right? So,
exactly.
So that is, versus the coach who says, I'm the coach and do what I say. And like, you're doing it wrong. I do believe that's more of an egoic approach as a coach. And to be able to sit there with intense curiosity, which I always tell my clients, I'm like, I'm here for me because I want to learn. Joke about that. I'm like, I'm really kind of here for me. But I think that from a coaching standpoint, that would be a good thing to point out, is that if you're a coach and you don't feel like you can learn from your students, that might be your ego. If you feel like you can always learn from your students, then that might be more soul directed. I say as a player, the same thing. You can teach your coach, especially, like you said, about all kinds of things. And I think just again to recognize, like, if my ego is either going to say I'm the best or I'm the worst or I can't learn anymore or whatever it is, right? We can kind of see those things come out. And like you said, sometimes the ego comes out, but just learn from it, right? And then go to that highest form of passion and love, because that is the soul. The soul is when you are in that state of being, right? When you're of loving something so much you don't care. And you lose all that. It doesn't matter if you're washing the dishes or playing the sport, right? So my last question for you is, do you have any opinion about professional sports and how that's portrayed in America?
It's interesting because I am in a city where professional sports is highlighted pretty significantly. As you know, we have the Eagles and the Phillies and the 76ers. Um, and, I'm not somebody who sits and I'm not a big TV watcher, and I'm not somebody who sits and watches a lot of sports. Yet I've had obviously time to do that. And it's also other sports, even soccer or football abroad. And I will say, and this might sound a little, I do feel that one component that what I'd like to see build more so in our industry is incorporating greater spiritual practices into such professional sports. I know that it exists. I know that some of these pro teams have spiritual advisors and spiritual counselors. I don't know the depth of their practice and what they do. Yet from just even, I'm a big observer and I'm an intuitive, right? So I pick up on energy. And I can always tell when I'm watching teams and they're competing against each other, all right, that team definitely, they spend time, focusing on not being so ego driven. This other team, you can really see where there's going to kind of be a shift in how they perform. So I do know it's escalating in its own way. I'm also just a huge advocate of kind of bringing in different energies into coaching, whether it's bringing someone on who maybe doesn't know that much about the sport, yet can bring a different type of vision for the team and help them as professionals grow. We do obviously at the club here, we serve a quite significant amount of the athletes who come in and perform, and some are professional players. And I know that one of the reasons why they like to come in here is it kind of gives them a little time out, right? They can take a break and they can work out and really sort of be in a community. And also, I find that really important as well, is being able to navigate your own soul and not just make your sport your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a football game on the television right now.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I was in professional sports for a long time and I would be in the stadiums all the time. And the energy that you would feel from the crowd was, I mean, and every person that I was around, we would all say the same thing, like you can't replace it. But there's definitely other times where you can see that isn't the case, right? There's disappointment amongst the crowd, or there's expectations amongst the crowd, or there's like one of the things they used to say and the Blackhawks is Detroit sucks. I'm like, well, they don't suck. They're professionals and they're here, and so like you can see the ego come out, but there was certainly, it was almost like before anyone played it, you could feel that energy of just being excited to watch the event. That to me felt less ego based than the judgment that people were having while watching the event. Does that make sense?
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. In my article that I talk about with sports, I do bring up what I call the euphoria in the air, right? When the crowd goes roar and everyone's so excited to watch, their favorite player having their own, what I consider hero's journey. And I think that's something that's really significant when it comes to athletes. And also the judgment is huge, right? Because we are in a world where that's pretty significant every moment of every day. And the less we can be judgmental about how someone's performing. And as you said, just knowing that they're having a good time and they might not be the most stellar player, yet they know that they're going to perform to their level because they're not going to have any pressure and there's no one making any judgment calls. And at the same time, to make a judgment call on a professional team when you're not even a professional athlete is a little like, right? So I kind of do this.
So in our last few minutes here, I know you also just work with people individually. What type of clients do you like to attract?
Well, interestingly enough, a lot of it are our athletes and professional coaches and competitive athletes, because obviously that is a language I'm very familiar with already, and I'm able to speak. So they are some of my clients. In addition, as I mentioned to you, I do have a healing arts background, so I try to spend time with other souls who might be going through some struggles, anywhere from depression to anxiety. And I do also serve as a spiritual counselor for a hospice. So that gives me a different kind of opportunity to spend time with souls who are getting ready to transition on in their end of life stages. And that's another opportunity for me to find balance even within my own self.
And so do you, when you're working with athletes specifically, do you have any very memorable moments of like, realizing what the consciousness of the athlete does to help someone really grow their spiritual, awareness?
A lot of it really has to do with their initial interest in wanting to make changes within themselves. I'm a big believer that, I believe that bliss is fear. So, like, when you go and you enjoy the fear that you're experiencing, and that might be something that can be a little crazy and be a little chaotic, that's also going to help you ultimately change, right? And so, oftentimes when I'm working with athletes, that's my first question is like, all right, so what are you looking for? Where are you needing to heal? Like, what kind of change are you needing to hopefully hone in on to create obviously like a more positive mindset, whether it's, as I said to you before, like that work-life balance. A lot of high-level executives too kind of fall into that same category. I know several in particular who are, they work really hard. They might be marathoners or what have you, or triathletes, yet it's like they kind of forget time. They forget to take time for themselves, right? And so I also focus on that. And I tend to also, even for my own self, like I'm a huge advocate for rest. I feel as though we go into this world, especially now in this day and age, where we're losing sight of just resting, just taking a time, just a moment, just of rest. And that often brings you more clarity.
I want to just make sure I heard you right. Did you say, are they enjoying the fear that they're experiencing? Is that what you just said? I've never heard anyone say that before, but that is beautiful. Like that is
thank you.
I mean, that's like a perfect like mic drop for me, where you just say like, yeah, the ego doesn't go away. You will feel fear, but are you enjoying that? Like I've never heard anyone put it that way. And that's such a cool way for that's an athletic attitude, in my opinion, right? Like, did you go on the court, right, when you were shaking? Did you stand up and play, in the championship when you weren't sure? Did you try something totally different, a different swing when you were golfing in the championship? Like that's what I'm hearing you say is where the soul kind of gets to enjoy that. Like it's almost like that was cool. Are you enjoying the sphere you're experiencing? That is such an athlete thing to say.
Right? Because it's like, as I said, fear to me is bliss in so many ways, because it gives us that opportunity to grow, to change, and as you said, to navigate and find out what we're working on, and really to hone in on the ego and make sure that our ego isn't, because as we know, oftentimes when the ego is in our energy field and in control, if you will, then as we mentioned before, our performance is not going to be 110%, right? We think it might be, but oftentimes it's like that ultimate competitor and their anxiety and how they are. If they don't perform to their standards, then they're going to go whoosh all the way down, and they're going to have to start up again, instead of just celebrating that experience and saying, okay, how can I do this out of fear and love the fear? So,
wow, what a great, I feel like you'd be such a fun person to work with.
Thank you.
Like, bring on the fear. Like, let's talk about it. Like, rather than bypassing it, which is truly a soul answer. So thank you so much for being here. How can people find you if they want to find out more?
Thank you. Certainly. So I'm on LinkedIn. I have a profile for my full name, which is Serena Carbonell. I also have my Spiritual Living with Serena LinkedIn profile. Twitter. I'm really not on other social media. I do have an Instagram account for my Spiritual Living, yet that's not I'm not very active on it. I don't spend too much time on social media. So that's one way. I think from just a professional perspective, probably LinkedIn is the safest and the easiest. It is an open profile, and there one can message me and we could move forward with. I do not have I'm on heal.me, which is another website that you can also visit and get a little bit more sense of more of that healing side that I focus on.
Yeah, so and you've written some articles. Yeah. You said you've written some articles under Brains, BRAINZ. So I know, Yep. So that's where I found you on LinkedIn. So I know you're easy to find. So I hope people will look for you. You seem like
I
a really
do
fun
too,
person
Lynn.
to work with.
So do you. This is really fun. Thank you. No, I do have a lot of fun, and I feel that also resonates is when you love what you are doing, everyone sees it, right? Because you have your own glow and you have your own light, if you will,
Yeah.
and when you're not happy with what you're doing, that's also pretty noticeable too. So.
Yeah, and gosh, everyone deserves what you just said, to have their own light, their own glow, and not compare themselves to anybody and just go for it. So
Mm-hmm.
you seem like a good person to work with and to
Yeah.
find that. So thank you for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it as well. Thank you so much.
All right.